Hey. Again, as you have questions throughout, don't hesitate to ask. And I'll stop periodically to just assess and invite questions along the way. But what I really want to accomplish tonight are a couple of different things. I want to be able to articulate to you this whole sense of balance with respect to what we refer to as the three-legged stool. And I'm going to do that in a way that's going to seem like I'm sharing, roles and responsibilities, which I will be doing of each entity, but it's all in the spirit of you being able to identify how each of those roles really play together to create this stool balance that we're talking about this evening. So I want to talk to you about that. I want to talk to you about what happens when the stool isn't balanced. So if there is an imbalance, what might that look like and what might cause that? And also, as I've done in the past, we'll start out the session with some definitions and share a little bit of that charter school structure just to be sure we're operating under the same context and within the same framework. So without further ado, I will advance to the next slide. So NACSA, our friends at NACSA, the National Association of Charter School Authorizers, they are authorizer advocates in our country. They help the authorizing community advance their strategies as well as professionally develop those authorizers that are either new to the sector or want to improve their authorizing skills. But one thing that NACSA does for us is they publish documents, they publish reports, they publish research, they publish what are called issue briefs. And in 2006, they actually published an issue brief that tried to address the same subject I'm sharing with you this evening, only they called it Studying the Three-Legged Stool. But I pulled an excerpt out of that issue brief that I thought was very appropriate for us this evening, and you can see it on your screen, that a three-legged stool is always stable regardless of its placement on an even surface, and the whole idea is to keep the top parallel to the floor and comfortable to sit on. But we do know that oftentimes that requires careful steps to achieve the balance among each of the three legs. And again, that's exactly what we're going to be talking about this evening, the balance among each of those three legs as we've identified them. But to achieve the balance that we're looking for, we need to understand two things primarily. We need to understand who is responsible for the balance and what is it we're trying to balance anyway. What is that? What is that on top of that seat that needs a comfortable place? So we're going to talk about that as well. So the who we've identified, we've talked about the board, we've talked about the authorizer, and we've talked about the ESP. And incidentally, I might use ESP, management company operator, interchangeably tonight, but just know I'm talking about the same entity relative to this stool. So those are the three key elements that are involved in balancing, in this balancing act. But what is it that we are trying to balance? So I'm going to submit to you this evening that what is it we're trying to balance is performance. Because regardless of the leg support we're giving this stool, at the end of the day, we are all interested in performance, whether we're an authorizer, whether we're an ESP, or whether we're a board. We want performance. We want to create schools that are absolutely excellent in academic outcomes, in fiscal outcomes, in business outcomes. And that all ties back and under the umbrella of this word, of this performance approach. So it's the who, the board authorizer, ESP. What we're trying to balance is performance, and one way we balance that performance is through the charter contract. This is why the charter contract is often referred to as a charter performance contract, because it contains that performance language that, again, we're all held accountable to, whether we're a board, whether we're an authorizer, or whether we're an ESP. So you see this cover sheet of your charter contract that should look familiar to hopefully most of you. And I see Jennifer Jarosa's on the line. Jennifer, this should look particularly familiar to you because it's off Charlton Heston's Charter Performance Contract page. So again, the who, the what, and the through, those are what we're going to be talking about also this evening. When we talk about performance, we're really talking about three key elements to the performance outcomes, and they're academic, fiscal, and operational. So there are performance strategies, performance expectations tied to each one of those elements that, again, are either outlined in your charter contract and or delineated and codified through other documents that we're going to talk about a few slides from now. And how do we achieve this performance balance? Again, I'm going to suggest to you this evening that there are three primary ways. Now, I'm not sharing that this is it. These are the only ways. There certainly might be other ways that you can identify or that you've experienced regardless of your position on the stool, but these are the ways that I've seen over the course of my nearly 20 years of doing this work that the stool maintains that balance that we're striving for. One way is to understand and respect the role of each party relative to the charter performance contract. Number two is to understand and respect the relationship of each party relative to performance accountability, and we all hear that all the time in this work. And number three, performing to and respecting the expectations delineated through the charter performance contract. So you'll see that performance word coming in all three of those, and obviously the charter contract is a key component of those pieces as well. Before we get into that, though, again, to ensure that we're operating under the same structure within the same context, I wanted to just quickly describe this graphic to you. And it's one we've talked about in past webinars, but I think it bears repeating for our discussion this evening. So as I've shared with you in the past, this is one of the best graphics that I've seen that really helps put our structural place in perspective. And it was actually prepared by Central Michigan University, so I don't take credit for this. I give them the kudos and the compliments that they deserve for actually coming up with this identifying graphic. But what this is trying to tell us in Michigan is that our overarching document for the K-12 work we do is the Michigan Constitution. Through the Michigan Constitution, the Michigan Legislature, which you see on the left of the diagram, and the State Board of Education, which you see on the right, have been given the primary powers, the primary authority to impact public education in our state. So on the left, the Michigan Legislature, as you know, has the authority, the responsibility to legislatively enact rules and regulations that help advance K-12 education in our state. And I'm sure as I say help advance, some of you are probably smiling about that, but that is the ultimate goal of the Michigan Legislature relative to our K-12 work. On the other side, the State Board of Education has been granted general supervisory authority for overseeing K-12 instruction in our work, in the work that we do, and that includes charter public instruction as well. And as you know, the state board has delegated that oversight work, that day-to-day oversight work to our state superintendent, Mike Flanagan, who relies on the full Michigan Department of Education to really manage those day-to-day functions on his behalf, on the state board's behalf. I've offset in teal for you the entities that are responsible for issuing charter contracts in our state. So as you know, likely these four entities, state public universities, public community colleges, school districts, and intermediate school districts, have been empowered to issue charter performance contracts in the state of Michigan. State public universities hold the lion's share of those charter performance contracts. contracts. Public community colleges, school districts, and intermediate school districts make up about a quarter of the charter contracts that have been issued in our state today. And the last time I looked, we were roughly around 300 operating charter public schools. Just a quick note, again, just to ensure that we're operating under the same context and within the same framework, public community college school districts and intermediate school districts can only authorize charter public schools within their geographic servicing district. So what that means is a physical facility of the charter school needs to be located in an area that is serviced by those entities. However, what that doesn't mean is that if Lansing Community College wants to issue a contract to a charter public school in Ingham County, they can't service kids from Southfield as long as those Southfield kids have transportation, because as you know, charter public schools know no boundaries. We are boundaryless. So any child can attend the school. What this is really talking about is the physical structure. And then just quickly to wrap this up, on either side of the diagram, you'll see arrows coming down. On one side, the State Board of Education side, that's where our state and federal accountability mandates are usually generated, and most of those mandates, all of those mandates as they impact K-12 education, K-12 charter education in our situation, really are incorporated into the charter contract in some way, shape, or form. On the other side, it tells us that it's those authorizing entities that are responsible for contracting and overseeing the work that you do as public school academy boards of directors. So you know, as we all say, the proverbial buck stops with you as public board members governing over these tremendous charter public schools in our state. And then finally, you see the dotted line running from the state superintendent to the vertical line running up and down around the authorizing body section. That just tells us that our state superintendent has the ability to suspend the authorizing powers of the authorizing entities should State Superintendent Flanagan deem our authorizing practices or oversight practices to be unworthy of our K-12 charter public school rule. And then obviously you oversee and govern over the public school academies for which you've been appointed by Lake Superior State University. So again, just some quick context for us. Now what I'd like to do is as we talked about, I'm going to go into the individual roles of each of those entities, the Authorizer Board, the ESB, at a higher level. So I'm not going to get into all the detail surrounding all of the work, but again, in the spirit of ensuring you see the connection among each of these parties relative to that stool stabilization, I'm going to share with you generally what each entity is responsible for doing, and we're going to start with the authorizer role. So your authorizer, obviously, is Lake Superior State University. So what LSSU does primarily in its authorizing role is first and foremost, it issues performance contracts to the board that it's their board or board members that it has appointed. Secondly, it executes its oversight functions relative to the issuance of that performance contract pursuant to the policies that have been adopted by its governing board. So as you know, the Lake Superior State University Charter Schools Office really functions as the administrative arm to the Lake Superior State University Board of Trustees for its charter schools work. So except for those areas with which Nick has been delegated authority by Lake State's Board of Trustees, most of the legal work, the contractual work that occurs between the board and Lake Superior State University is elevated to the governing board, to the Lake State Board of Trustees for final ratification, approval, or authorization. Lake Superior State University also oversees board compliance, your compliance to the performance contracts as part of that oversight function in those key areas that we identified earlier, in the areas of academics, finance, and compliance reporting. In that capacity, it appoints board members. It also renews and reauthorizes the charter contract based upon key decision-making elements. It administers periodic assessments on performance relative to contract goals and expectations. And yes, every authorizer wants to establish relationships with its schools, with its boards, based upon mutual trust and respect, clear expectations, and a shared vision with board and with its management. So that is, again, primarily the authorizer's function. Now we're going to move into your role, the board's role, again, at its highest level. Your role as board members, as boards collectively, is to execute the charter performance contract with the authorizer. It's to establish and adopt governance policies for consistent application of its governance role. The expectation is, as well, by your authorizer, that you're going to establish effective systems and processes that will help faithfully and responsibly satisfy your governance role. You're going to self-perpetuate your members, ensuring full board membership at all times in accordance with your performance contract bylaws. You are going to be held accountable for meeting or exceeding those performance goals as outlined in your charter performance contract. And you are going to foster a transparent, no surprises approach with your authorizer. And also, and lastly, you're going to establish evaluation processes for yourself and for management. So again, those are your critical, your key responsibilities as board members. So I'm going to stop there for a minute and just ask if, with the authorizer role, with the board rule, if any of you have any questions, if I've shared anything where you thought I didn't know that, or I guess I do know that, but what about X? So I'm just going to take a minute. I'm going to let you use your raise hand icon or the questions pane to ask any questions that you might have right now at this time. And if you don't have any, that's fine too, but again, I just want to give you the opportunity to ask. Okay, good. If we're all set there, if we're all clear on the authorizer board rule, again, relative, this is all in the spirit of this Stool balancing act, then we're going to move to the ESP management company and or operator. So again, generally speaking, the ESP has primary core functions. Its number one core function is to accept responsibility for day-to-day academy functions in whatever capacity that ESP has signed on for. So we understand in this work that you as the board have contracted for different kinds of services with different kinds of management companies. Some of you use what we call full management companies, where it's everything, even perhaps a curriculum. Some of you are just engaged in some of those key services like HR, like compliance, like finance reporting. Some of you might contract with a management company with an employee leasing agency that just does that, the HR functions, leases employees to you to use for academy purposes. Regardless, though, we refer to all of those roles and within the context of this conversation as the ESP. So the ESP accepts responsibility to do whatever it is that you've hired them to do. And in the context of that, they've agreed to administer procedurally those daily business and operational functions that you expect of them and that you've negotiated through a mutually agreed upon management agreement. They agree to operate all aspects of the school in alignment with the vision and mission established by you, the board. They may assist in identifying board members. That's very appropriate. Through their operational business functions, they are expected to meet or exceed charter performance contract goals. They're going to support your transparent, no-surprise approach, and they too can participate in the development of evaluation and/or assessment tools. So those are the individual roles, again, at the higher level as we know them. So now what we're going to take a look at is how do those relationships work together, and how do they work together in the spirit of satisfying the charter performance contract expectations and needs. So as we said, the authorizer issues the performance contract to the governing body. The board agrees to perform pursuant to those contract terms. The authorizer executes the oversight functions pursuant to policies adopted by the authorizer governing board. The board then ensures compliance with the authorizer policies by following all terms and conditions of the performance contract while adopting its own governance policies for consistent application. The authorizer oversees compliance to the contract in those key areas, again, academics, finance, and compliance reporting. The board establishes those effective systems that ensure vision and mission commitment, student achievement and growth, fiscal integrity, and good faith operations as articulated through the performance contract. The authorizer appoints the board members. The board ensures that the board is consistently at full membership. Some boards might take this role seriously enough to develop some kind of succession plan for boards. So they can always be sure that when there is turnover in board membership that they have someone to fill that seat rather quickly. So there's not a lag in full membership. And again, you're doing this in compliance with the charter performance contract, and more importantly, and most importantly, in compliance with your performance contract bylaws. Your bylaws spell out how you should be functioning as a board. So to satisfy those requirements, those expectations, you're going to ensure that full membership role. The authorizer is going to renew reauthorized charter contract. You're going to be held accountable for meeting and exceeding those performance contract goals, because what you want to do is, again, there's that word ensure again, right? Ensure that you're receiving the maximum renewed or reauthorized charter contract term. The authorizer, as I indicated, wants to establish those relationships based upon mutual trust and respect, clear expectations, and a shared vision. And you, board, want to foster that. You want to foster that by being transparent, by being open and honest with your authorizer so there are no surprises. And if you do that, then you will be able to achieve this relationship based upon mutual trust and respect. The authorizer administers periodic assessments on performance pursuant to the performance contract. And board, you're going to assess performance of the school on some kind of frequency and an intentional basis through the use of transparent reports, dashboards, management evaluations, board self-evaluations, again, all in compliance with the charter performance contract. So I'm going to ask a question, and again, just show your hand. Oh, Bernard, I'll get to you in just a minute. I'm going to ask this question too and see if anybody else has a hand to raise or a question to ask. How many of you have developed what you think are good systems, are good processes to track performance of the schools over which you're governing? So you know how well the school is doing at all times, and you can respond to it as appropriate. So I'll give you a minute to raise your hand. While you're thinking about that, I'm going to get to Bernard. It looks like he has a question. Bernard, thank you. If you have a question or comment, feel free to speak. Bernard, can you hear me? Bernard? Hello? Bernard? Okay, I apologize for that. I don't think you could hear me. Bernard, if you can hear me and if you have a question, feel free to type it in the questions pane on your screen as well. But again, do any of you have any kind of best practices to share relative to your role in assessing performance that you'd like to share with the rest of the group? Tom, thank you. Do you have something you'd like to share?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes, I sure can.
Oh, super. We have a dashboard that we've asked our school director to provide a meeting at every board meeting, which includes a set of performance parameters that we've laid out for the school, compliance performance, some school student achievement expectations that we've set out, and those in addition to staff updates and staff information about how the staff are performing based on evaluations that are being done in the school. We ask for all that at every board meeting, and it takes 5 or 6 minutes, but we get that at every board meeting, which is nice.
Yeah.
It's an expectation we have of our director.
Good, good. That's so encouraging. It does my heart good to hear you speak to that, Tom. And so the second part of that question would be then, and Tom, you could answer, or anyone else who's on the line, is so there's you get the information, you've developed the systems, you developed the processes, the dashboard. What do you do with that information, right? So the assumption is you're going to get, and likely you get, Tom, positive information. But when you see things in that dashboard that isn't quite what you expect, how do you handle that? How do you respond to that as a board?
The way we've approached it is to make that an opportunity to discuss that either at the board level or to have that be a point of action for after the board. So we've discussed problems with enrollment. We've talked about, we'll just discuss them right there at the meeting. Obviously, if it has something to do with an individual, we have to handle that a little bit differently. But
sure.
So I think what it does is it just brings these things to the light and allows us to recognize a problem and then come up with some kind of a plan to deal with it. And usually that has to do with the director putting forth some plan right there at the board meeting. So the board's involved.
Good, good. Appropriately involved, it sounds, which is great. Great. Thank you so much for sharing, Tom. I appreciate it. Very good. Bernard, can you hear me? Bernard, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Oh, okay. You have your hand up. Do you have a question to ask or something to share?
I was just wondering how many of the boards had the accountant that worked for the board opposed to the management company.
Okay. Well, while your fellow participants are thinking about that, you know that as a board you're required to acquire and hire your own independent auditor and accountant. So hopefully the majority of members on this line are following that requirement and have a separate accountant and or auditor for board work versus management work.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you, Bernard, for your comment. Very good. Okay, good. Good questions, good input. So now we're going to go on. You see the authorizer-board relationship and how that relationship works together. We're now going to advance and we're going to tie in the ESP role. So again, the authorizer issues a contract, the board executes and they agree to perform through executing that contract, and then the ESP accepts responsibility for the day-to-day performance functions aligned with the contract pursuant to the agreement entered into between board and management. So really two key pieces on that. So the management has a responsibility to the board to perform in compliance with the charter contract, right? So that's a relationship there. And there's also this agreement between board and management that speaks to performance that also should align back to the charter performance contract. So again, a couple of key elements to that role, to those responsibilities. And as we discussed, the authorizer executes its oversight functions pursuant to those policies adopted. The board ensures compliance with those policies by following the terms and conditions and adopting their own policies as a governing body. And then the ESP agrees to administer procedurally the daily business and operational functions as directed and codified through all policies and performance contracts. So you board members have adopted governing policies, for example. Some of you use likely the National Charter Schools Institute's administrative guidelines. So those administrative guidelines really help your school leader, and in those instances where you do have an educational service provider, the school leader is an extension of that, helps the school leader determine through his or her day-to-day practices how you as a board want your policy expectations carried out on a day-to-day basis. So the administrative guidelines, those administrative procedures speak to that. That's the connection we're talking about here. The next key function, the authorizer oversees compliance in those three key areas. The board establishes those effective systems and processes that Tom was referring to, that his board has established, that ensure that vision and mission commitment, student achievement and growth, fiscal integrity, and good faith operations. And then the ESP agrees to operate all aspects of the school responsibly and in alignment with the vision and mission established by the board. And you can read there what I've typed. I won't read it to you. But this is really getting to the fact that the authorizer oversees the board's established systems, and through the establishment of those systems and processes, the ESP is agreeing to operate in compliance with all of that to execute against those board assurances of positive outcomes. The next one, the authorizer appoints the board members. The board ensures that the board is consistently at full membership. And as we discussed, it's very appropriate for the ESP to assist in identifying board members to bring to the full board for consideration. The authorizer reauthorizes, renews the charter contract. The board's accountable for meeting or exceeding those goals to ensure that maximize renewed charter contract. And through its operational business functions, the ESP is going to meet or exceed those performance contract goals to help ensure the board's maximum renewed reauthorized charter contract term. And again, they're going to do this by carrying out those administrative functions to which they've been delegated by the board exceptionally well. Next, the authorizer wants to establish that relationship based upon mutual trust and respect. The board is going to foster that, and the ESP is going to support that. They're going to support that transparent, no surprise approach by keeping you board members informed of all activities regarding student, fiscal, and compliance outcomes. And if that happens, this relationship too between the board and the ESP, the board authorizer and the ESP, will result in a relationship based upon mutual trust and respect. And then finally, the authorizer administers those periodic assessments. The board assesses on a frequent basis. Management is going to participate in the development of those assessment tools and report information on contract performance to the board in a transparent, timely, and consistent manner. So again, hopefully, I know you understand each of these roles in isolation, but for purposes of our conversation today, I'll say it again. I wanted you to see how they work together, and again, how they work together to create and maintain that three-legged stool balance. So this is what the roles balance look like. And let me just point out a couple of things here. First of all, I wanted to try to create some kind of three-legged stool to best articulate what it is we're trying to share, but I couldn't quite get there. My creative skills, my artistic skills really stopped a few slides ago when I showed you the actual stool. That was the extent of it. So instead, what I chose to do is bring it all together in this table format for you. But you'll see in this picture, the authorizer is in the middle. Remember, we started with the authorizer, and the work stemmed, the further discussion stemmed from the authorizer. But here what I want to demonstrate to you is the authorizer has a very unique role in this work, in this balancing act. And for them, for Lake State, it is a balancing act, and this is why. Because they know, and you board understand, that their contractual relationship is with you as the board, that they have a legal obligation to develop and sustain and forge that positive contractual relationship based upon the performance contract. But they also understand that the ESP plays a significant role in those outcomes by the inputs that they're delivering on a daily basis on your behalf. So you've heard of this in the past. The ESP is really the executors of the work, right? They're the hows, you're the how well. So the ESP is focused on the inputs, on the day-to-day functions that are going to result in the how well, the positive, hopefully positive outcomes that you board and board members are most interested in. So the authorizer's role is really one of both. The authorizer will and does communicate with the ESP as well as it should, and certainly holds in very high esteem the board as that contractual entity through that contractual relationship. So just wanted to demonstrate that. And I will share with you that there are some authorizers, and yours is not one of them, that will not talk to management, that will not talk to the ESP. They've just refused to do it. That every piece of communication relative to the school is with and goes through the board. And philosophically, if that's the approach, that's the approach. I just can't imagine maintaining an effective stool balance with that kind of philosophy. So again, understand that your authorizer, I believe, supports this balanced relationship by communicating with both sides of the stool, with both legs, as they say. So we've talked about how to maintain stool balance, but we also know that there are times when that doesn't always happen, when there is an imbalance in the balance, when the stool becomes unbalanced. So what happens in those cases? Well, we know that charter performance is compromised when the legs are cut off or unstable. And so this is a visual of what that could look like. So now we're going to talk a little bit about what might cause that stool imbalance. And again, I'm going to suggest to you that there are really three key elements to stool imbalance. Number one is that there is a misunderstanding or no understanding of expectations. Number two, there's a general blind trust of and among parties, and this can go either way. It can land with the ESP, it can land with the board. No questions, just acceptance. And then number three, there's a real lack of transparency and or sharing of information. I believe, again, through my experience, that all three of these contribute to an imbalanced stool. So we're just going to talk about what each one of those elements might look like in practice. So misunderstanding or no understanding of expectations. Why might that happen, or what might that look like? Well, it might happen because perhaps you have an ambiguous charter performance contract, that you just don't understand the language, you don't understand the expectations, they're not clearly written out, it's not clearly outlined. In your case, as boards appointed by Lake Superior State University, with a contract that's commonly used among Michigan authorizers, you probably don't have to worry about this. But I will tell you, there are states that have adopted charter school laws that have, through those laws, empowered entities to authorize charter public schools that don't use contracts at all, which obviously creates a whole host of problems in charter schools world. So folks like NACS are helping those authorizers develop those charter performance contracts. But again, if there's ambiguous language in documentation, whether that be your contract or your management agreement, there's obviously going to be a misunderstanding or no understanding of expectations. Ineffective communication can create the misunderstanding or no understanding of expectations. So those of you that participated a couple of webinars ago, remember we delivered the webinar on effective communication among the authorizer and the board, and we shared with you some strategies that will help ensure effective communication in the spirit of vision integrity. So, some of those that we shared, if those don't happen, they can, create some ineffectiveness and then misunderstanding or no understanding of those expectations. Lack of systems or processes to determine performance outcomes. So if there's nothing in place to help you identify how well your management is doing against those expectations, then obviously that's going to contribute to a stool imbalance. Perhaps there's a reactive versus proactive culture. Again, this is sort of the outcome of the misunderstanding or no understanding of expectations, but we see this a lot. Oftentimes there's no time to discuss the expectations because everyone's too busy reacting to the environment. There's just constant sense of reactivity because of unsettled environments or chaos. I hope this isn't any of you. And then perhaps there's a lack of clear policies or no policies and or guidelines. So again, contributing factors to that misunderstanding or no understanding of expectations. And the second one, blind trust of and among all parties. No questions, just acceptance. So why does this sometimes sometimes happens. It sometimes happens because I submit to you there's a lack of understanding or comfort with role. So as board members, if you don't understand your role, or again, there's a lack of understanding of what is expected of you or what it is you're to be doing, sometimes you just say, okay, that sounds good to me, because you just don't know any better. Again, I trust that's not any of you, but we have seen this happen. There's just a general deference to the experts. So your authorizer knows, those of us that have worked with you over the years understand, and hopefully you know, that there isn't an expectation that you are going to become experts on K-12 education in our state. This is exactly why you've contracted with someone who has the capacity, who has the experience, who has the skills to help you satisfy your role by being the experts in those areas, in those key areas. So that's not really what I'm talking about here. We understand that they're experts, that you're not experts in K-12 education, and that you're not expected to be. What happens and where the problem surfaces is when you just are deferring to the experts all the time. So in practice, what does this look like? This looks like maybe management reporting to you on we'll use MEP results, right? So the MEP results aren't that great, and the reason why they're not that great is because, you remember, we're trying to educate kids that have come in 2 years behind grade level, and you know, we've developed this intermediate NWEA assessment, so the RIT scores look good. So it's just a whole host of explanations that might befuddle you a little bit, but because they're the experts, you're just going to sit back and you're going to accept that. That's what I'm talking about here. Not knowing what you don't know, right? So oftentimes early in the board role, you don't even know what it is that you're supposed to be knowing. So when I talk about ensuring student outcomes, fiscal performance, compliance reporting, initially, you know, some of you might have been thinking, what is that, right? What is she talking about? I don't even know what this means. That's the not knowing what you don't know. That's common for board members in their early phases. I would encourage you, and I continue to encourage board members, that if there are certain aspects of those key elements that you don't know, generally speaking, it would be in your best interest to get the professional development you need to get you to a place where you're comfortable and you can ask those wise questions. There's a lack of commitment or dedication. You simply don't care. Again, this is none of you. I'm certain of it. But these are the board members that come to the board meetings, and all they really care about is getting home to watch American Idol or The Voice or moving on to eat dinner. So they're watching their watch consistently. This is a problem. There is perhaps a fear of potential conflict or controversy. If you are on a board, or if you are a board member that fears conflict and you don't want to ask questions or raise issues because of that fear, I'm going to tell you, you got to try to get over that. And one way I think you can try to get over that is to always remember that this work is not about you. It's about the students that are attending your respective schools. It's about the students that you are trying to academically service in exceptional ways. So if the conflict or controversy gets to that idea, then it's worth speaking about. So there is going to be conflict. There is going to be controversy in your board role, especially as you're communicating with your management and or your authorizer. You have to be comfortable with that, because you have to understand at the end of the day, the conflict is about trying to make these schools and trying to impact these schools in the most excellent ways. Sometimes there's a blind trust appearance because you don't know what questions to ask. You know that there are some wise questions, but you're not sure what those look like. So we've talked a little bit about wise questions on the phone or on these webinars in the past. So again, I'll share with you the wise questions are the how well questions, right? They're the how well questions. So they are the how well are we doing on the MEP? How well are we doing preparing our students for high school or college? How well are we doing financially? How well are our ESL, English as Second Language learners doing? So the how well questions are generally what we refer to as the wise questions. Maybe there's just an inaccurate definition of micromanaging. Fear of asking questions because you really have this anxiety around becoming a micromanager or being perceived or construed as a micromanager. So I'm going to quickly share an experience that I had recently with a school in Detroit. I was working with the board. I work with a board in the Detroit area who is relatively new, who's trying to navigate its role relative to the management company. So in our session about a month ago, I asked what the board's fund balance was, and they didn't know. They had no idea. In fact, they weren't even really sure if when they saw a financial report, it was their money or management's money. So but that was problematic, as you can imagine. But the reason why they were fearful of asking those questions is because they didn't want to seem as though they were micromanaging management. And so, of course, my advice to them is there's a fine line between asking the wise questions and micromanaging. So, again, you have to be able to ask the questions. Don't worry so much about micromanagement. You'll know when you're treading into or penetrating the micromanaging walls. You'll feel it. And those of you that have been longtime board members, you probably know what I'm talking about. So again, just by sake of example, here's a micromanaging scenario that I'll give to you. And it's ridiculous. It's probably a little bit exaggerated, but maybe not. We've seen it in past years, and it's the wall painting scenario, right? It's the school leader who comes to the board and shares his or her report, and in the report, he shares that he or she is going to be repainting the walls red or green. And all of a sudden, the board gets into conversation about the color of the paint. So we're talking about the differences between purple, pink, red, and green. Maybe, you've read a little bit about how certain colors impact certain moods. So you feel compelled to engage in this conversation. That is micromanaging at its finest. What isn't micromanaging, what might be a wise question relative to that same conversation, is now the school leader is telling you, board, we're going to repaint the walls. I've hired a painter. We're using this tremendously effective, long-lasting paint. What a wise question might be from the board with respect to that conversation is, what kind of financial support do you need from us? And or did we, was this part of the budget approving process? Did we approve this budgetarily? If we didn't, what do we need to do to ensure that we have the financial means for doing this? So again, just the difference between micromanaging kinds of questions and conversation versus wise question conversation. So again, I know we're quickly approaching 7 o'clock. I just have a couple slides left, but I want to stop for a minute and just invite you to share any thoughts or ask any questions relative to the two pieces we've discussed so far. Hi, Jennifer. You have a question or comment for me?
I do have a question. So I'm going to try to make it a wise question.
Very good. You've been listening.
Yes. When you say the second bullet on there, the difference between or the difference to the experts.
Yeah.
So when we have a question that, like as a board member, that we're unsure of, you know, who is the? I mean, who do we have? I know Lake State is very supportive. We have a great superintendent, but when you are feeling not confident with some of the things that are going on and just have questions that may or may not pertain to exactly student achievement or compliance or like the dashboard, who can we go to for those questions as a board member, individually asking for ourselves for clarification? I guess is what I'm asking.
Sure. So I would say to you, Jennifer, if there are questions where, maybe you're just not comfortable going to your superintendent, where you feel like maybe you need to be educated or professionally developed a little more deeply, then I would not hesitate to go to Nick in Lake Superior State University and just say, hey, something came up at our meeting and it made me think about, needing, a little better understanding of this. Do you have someone there that could maybe help me through it or help us through it, or do you recommend we contact someone? So I wouldn't hesitate to do that. Is that what you're asking?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, I mean, I know that Lake State has those supports, and I remember Glenn Bachman when we were at the retreat with the dashboard that the last board member talked about earlier, and those kinds of things. So I knew those systems were in place, but it's okay for us to just go ahead and directly contact the authorizer directly.
I think so. Yeah, I think Nick would encourage that. Again, if you feel like you are not, quite understanding what your superintendent is sharing, absolutely. I would always start there. I wouldn't hesitate to use your authorizer as a resource. They appreciate that. They would welcome that conversation. And if Nick feels that maybe for whatever reason he doesn't have someone on staff to answer those questions for you, Jennifer, he will certainly put you in touch with someone or some entity that can help you.
Perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome. Good, very good. Okay, thank you, Jennifer, for that comment. We'll move on. I don't see any hands up, so just quickly, I promised I'd have you done by 7, and we're running a little late. So I'll just run through this last slide relatively quickly. And again, this is the final means of what I see creating that stool imbalance. So this is a lack of transparency and or sharing of information. And again, just a key few pieces of why that might happen or could happen. So there's an uncertainty of what to share or what to provide. So this now is coming perhaps from your ESP to you. Maybe your educational service provider doesn't really know what you want from them. So therefore they're hesitant to give it to you. So I would say to you for this point to recall, and again, for those of you, because a lot of these webinars, there's some common conversation, right? I would encourage you to go to Lake State's website, take a look at that effective communications webinar that we delivered a couple of webinars ago, and really think about some of those components, because one of the keys, as we identified it, to ensuring effective communication is establishing those clear expectations. Those clear expectations around what kinds of information should we be sharing board from the ESP, what's a reasonable time frame to be sharing that information with you, So again, take a look at that. But for purposes of this conversation, the uncertainty of that is oftentimes what causes what looks to be a lack of transparency and or sharing of information. And then there's an uncertainty oftentimes of when to provide the information or when to request information be provided. So just what I had suggested. And again, board, you might be thinking that you should be getting some kind of academic achievement data at every monthly board meeting when your ESP is thinking, wait a minute, I don't have any updated information to share because we haven't administered the MAP or the performance series or the MEEP or any other kind of assessment, the DIBELS that might be administered at the school level. So we're not sure what you're looking for. So again, those clear expectations around what and timing is important. Little to no documented support for verbal transmission. So again, in that effective communications webinar, we shared with you what was appropriate information to share at a board meeting, what wasn't. And one of the inappropriate statements from both a financial and an academic perspective is we did great on the MEEP and or we're doing great financially, and that becomes the report. That's really not acceptable, right? You as the board have every right to say, you know what, that's not good enough. We need support for that statement. We need something to substantiate that we're doing great on the MEEP or that we're doing well financially. But sometimes that little to no documented support can just play right into this lack of transparency issue. And there's that asking wise questions again. That it seems that there's not transparency because the board's not asking the wise questions that it should be asking around those how well outcomes. Oh, and I skipped one. I apologize. More is not always better, and less is not always more. So oftentimes, and I've sat through board meetings, and you probably have too, where you're delivered, it's a novel, right? And this, I think, is particularly true sometimes after MEEP administration. So I was at a board meeting once where management came in with a report that probably was about 150 pages thick. And that's what they gave to the board as the report. That is not appropriate, and that is not better, because most often what is trying to happen there is a camouflage of something not so positive, right? So more is not always better, and less is not always more. So again, that too little, too much conversation can lead to the notion of lack of transparency and or sharing of information. Maybe there's not a common understanding of the information or communication flow, and that's creating some challenges. So what do I mean by this? I think this is particularly problematic in those situations where the U board have delegated hiring authority, for example, to your educational service provider. And in all respects, the staff that work at the school over which you're governing reports to their employer, the management company, but yet you want to be able to communicate with those staff members on certain issues, and management is saying, no, board, you can't do that. These are not your employees. What I want to articulate to you here is that you just need to be cognizant of the communication flow and develop some kind of mutually agreed upon communications flow chart. It sounds corny, but I think it will be helpful in ensuring that effective communication is happening and that there is a sharing of information and that there is not a lack of transparency. And again, I say to you here that a no surprise approach is always the best approach. So, in summary, these are the key things that we've talked about and the key areas that we've touched upon this evening, and what I suggest you do in some areas. Number one, increasing the understanding of roles and responsibilities and expectations of each leg of the stool, and again, understanding how they all work together to really stabilize the stool itself and performance. So understand the charter performance contract and what is expected of each of the three legs relative to it. Regularly work toward achieving charter performance contract goals and establish systems and processes that keep all stakeholders informed of progress. Assume your role in relationship building and maintain stool balance by establishing those clear expectations, asking wise questions, and sharing information in a transparent, timely, clear, and concise manner. So again, in summary, I think we touched upon all of those conversations this evening, and I hope it was helpful. I hope you learned a little bit. I hope you can go back to the board table and apply some of these strategies effectively with your management organization. So before we close, I want to, again, just thank you so much for participating. Thank you for me, and thank you on behalf of Lake Superior State University as well. I will share with you that there are 2 webinars left for this school year series, and the next one will be delivered probably around the beginning of May. And in that webinar, we're going to talk about roles of board officers. So we're going to try to touch upon the role of the president, vice president, secretary, and treasurer. So we do hope you join us for that webinar discussion as well. So before I close off formally, let me just take a minute to invite questions, comments, thoughts. So I'm going to just be quiet and give you a second to raise your hand or ask those questions. Okay, I don't see any hands up or any questions asked, so I'm just going to suggest to you that if you have feedback to share, please feel free to share that with Lake Superior State University, or of course you're more than welcome to share it with me as well. So we look forward to your participation in future webinars, and I know if Nick was on the line, he would also suggest that as you have thoughts about future webinars, future discussions, anything that might help you perfect your board role, do not hesitate to run those proposed subjects by him. So I'm going to sign off. I'm going to thank you again all for participating. I wish you a happy St. Patrick's Day, and feel free to contact me with any questions and comments as you navigate this role. So have a good evening, and we will talk to you soon.